All right, so we are going to create a new IAM user. And basically, this particular Jitendra, as you see here, this is my root account. This is the account ID that AWS will assign to you as in your account number. So let's copy that here. I'm just gonna open the notepad and keep my account number for my reference. I'm just gonna show, you will understand later why I'm doing this. So once you do that, basically I want to create a new IAM user, and through that, basically how you can assign some permission to that user, how that user can actually connect. So in any organization, typically you will never have a root access. For example, here I have created a root access, and pretty much I can go to any AWS service. There are roughly close to 200 plus services in AWS, and you can actually get access to all of that as a root user. Now, that's not typically going to happen in the organization. So when you're working in an organization, there is a process in place where it has to be defined role for a particular individual. And in that case, question is, how do you set up the user when they onboard? And for that, basically, we need to create the user and assign the respective permission that belongs to that user. Okay, so for that, let's get started. I'm going to actually create a brand new user. So go to search box here and search for IAM service. IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. So I'm going to go to IAM service. Let's open that link in new window. And what we are going to do here is I'm going to go to this user section. Let's remind me later. That's fine. I'll click on this users link here. And once you do that, these are the multiple users I have created over, past 1 year to 2 years. But that's okay. So we are going to create a brand new user. Let's create a user here and give a username as you like. Let's say I want to say, maybe I want to create a reader, or I would say, read test reader. Let's say I just gave this name. And do you want to provide this user as a AWS management console access? So basically, let's not worry about this right now. It is basically saying, do you want this user to log in and have access to AWS management console, which is nothing but this dashboard or a screen when they log into the AWS. So we can select or give these permissions later. For now, I'm just going to create a blank user here. So let's say hit next. Now it is saying there are certain groups that AWS has pre-created for us. These are the groups which user can have access to. So basically I have a administrator group, or you can create a DevOps group. You can create a group, and within that group you can assign multiple permissions. Permissions is also called as policies in AWS. So we are not going to create a group right now, or rather I'm not going to add this user to any admin group. If you add this user to admin group, pretty much that user has full access like a root user. So you want to make sure you don't assign this access here unless it's really needed, or depending on the user role. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to select any group here, rather we will explicitly add some permissions. So let's just create the user blank for now. I'm just creating this user without any permissions and just creating. Let's hit that. And basically we should have a user created now, which is test reader. And as you see, the user is created. Currently this user does not have any access. As we know, there is no policy permissions added here. What we can do next is let me first log in. Let's log in this user with some permissions, and we can first check whether this user has anything to do in, does he have any access to any AWS services or not. So for that, for us to create the password for this user, let's go to this security credentials. I hit there, and you can actually create the console sign in permission. So this console sign in, if you allow, there is a dedicated link. You can give that to a user and they can easily directly land into AWS sign in page. So let's enable the console access, and we can say, yeah, hit enable. Do you want to generate a password? I want to generate a custom password. Let's say test user, or I would say test reader one maybe, and then hit apply. Now, whether you want, because you know this password as an admin person, So definitely when user logs in, you want that user to change the password. So you can hit this button and hit apply. It's updated, and let's delete this. And you can actually download these credentials for our reference if you forget this ID password. But we know the password is testreader1, testreader is the password, and this is the console link. So let's take that informations. Okay. And once you do that, close this screen. Now we want to test whether this user can log into with these credentials or not. So let's open a Chrome into incognito mode so that we can test with different ID. So I'm just gonna hit Control Shift N, and that really open up this screen, which is the incognito mode. So let's go to the link we have for that user, which is this link. Go to this, hit enter, and as you see, automatically this brings to this page, right? Now this account ID, you want to give the account ID which this user belongs to. So definitely when you created the brand new AWS account, you created a subscription, and in that subscription, this is the default account ID was assigned. So we put this account number here. The IAM user, we know it's test reader that we created, and the password is test reader1. Okay, let's sign in. Now, because we said this user need to change the password when they log in, I'm going to put the old password, which is test reader1, and let's change it to test reader2 maybe. Okay, I just did that, confirm password change. Now only that user knows their password, and it's changed permanently, and it's logged into this page. Now, as we know, this user does not have any permissions, as we know, as you can see here. This particular user doesn't have any permissions. So technically, this user should not be able to only the change password we allowed, so he is able to change his password. But apart from that, he does not have any access. He or she does not have any access to AWS services. So let's test that. So if I go to, let's say, S3, S3 is a simple storage service in AWS, which is used for object storage. So we can talk about all that later, but think about this is one of the storage service available, and you click this S3 service, and when you hit that through test reader user, okay, and I want to basically list down my buckets, you see this error. It says you don't have permission to list the buckets. Basically, in storage account, basically we can create the buckets and put our data, upload a lot of data. That is basically your storage account, and you're uploading data to your storage account. Now this user does not have permission to do this, and that's obvious because we did not give any permissions. So let's see how we can fix this and how we can assign only S3 permission to that user. So I'm going to go back to our main screen, which is our root account. And over here, let's say I want to add a permission for test user. So let's go to add permissions. I click on that add permission, and let's attach some policies directly to this user. So if I click on attach policy, there are a lot of these groups available, right? So but we don't want to do that. These are also called as managed policies. These policies that AWS has pre-created based on the defined roles in the industry, and definitely you can reuse these for most of your use cases depending on the resource and the role of the person. But let's understand, but you should be able to create your custom policies, right? And I want to show that how to do that, because that's the main thing here. So if I want to create any custom policy, you can, let's say, go ahead here and say, I'm going to say, um, hit next. Okay, let's go back to our IAM section and go to this policies. And I want to say create a policy. So let's hit create policy. And which service you want to create this policy. So they have given this nice editor, which is like a wizard that you can use to create policy. So I go to this S3. I want to allow some policy for S3. And then what exactly action you want to do? You want us to do all the actions, which is pretty much list, read, write, any kind of permissions you want to create under this policy, or you want to have very selected policy, just list user, then you can pretty much go to that level. And accordingly, AWS will allow or create this policy. Then when you allow this policy to that user will be able to do specific access based on these permissions you are giving. There is another better way to do this. If you're not a wizard person and you rather like the JSON, they gave this JSON nice view. I go to this JSON, which is nothing but you can clearly see how the permissions are granted. So I can come up with some policy name, custom policy name. You can say S3 full access maybe, right? I can come up with that name, and then you allow the access. So there is a specific way to write. You can say S3 colon star the star, and basically you have to put into double quotes, right? And to which resource you want to allow this access. So whether it is a specific AWS resource you want to allow, or you want to let anybody, as soon as they are logged in, you want to have blanket access for all the AWS resources to access this S3 buckets. Right, so now definitely there is some syntax error here because I did not put the particular double quotes. So if you have this kind of errors, definitely as a new person you will have errors, and you're free to use even in the JSON you can create these things by yourself. So let's say I'll just roll back whatever I change, and basically I wanted to allow full access, right? So you can go to this service. Let's say I want to allow access for service S3. Select S3, and then it is saying what type of access you want. Select that, and if you, let's say, just want to list them, you click on list and it only gives the list access. Or whether you want all access, so you just say all and it will give access to S3 star, right? And definitely when you give S3 star, you don't need the one with specific one access. Now coming to resources section, what resources you want to allow access. So hit add here, and then do you want to give access to specific bucket under that S3 accounts, or you want to have a specific access point to read the data across multiple AWS accounts to a specific endpoint. So there is a lot of customization you can do. For simplicity, let's just say star for now because I want to make it easy. Let all resources have access to S3 and hit add resource. And once you do that, this is a very simple setup, and we created a policy S3 full access. Let's hit next, and let's give a policy name here S3 full access. Okay, and I'm gonna select S3 here, which is already our policy, create a policy, and policy is created. So we can check our policy. It's S3 full access created. Now we have created this custom policy very specific to our needs, and I can go to that user, and search for your user, which is test reader. Okay, this is our user. Click on that and go to add permissions. Okay, add permission. You can also create the policy directly over here, what we did from the second screen. Same thing you can do inline here as well. But let's say I have already created, so I'm just going to add a permission and search for your permission, attach policy directly, and search S3 full access, which is our this particular access that we just created. So I'm just going to select that and hit next and add permissions. Now you see S3 full access is granted to that user. And if I go to incognito mode 1 and try to refresh the screen, now I'm able to list the buckets. Now I'm able to list everything that I have. These are a lot of data that I have created under my S3 buckets, which I'm able to view now because this user now have a read permissions. Okay. So that's all for here. Now there are few other things in IAM that you need to know. Basically, there is a user, groups, and roles that one need to create. If I have to show you here, this users, we looked at user, we looked at policies. Now we can also create a user groups. For example, there are two groups I have created, administrator and some test group. You can actually create a group and assign, give a group name, let's say test group, and actually you can assign respective permissions, administrator or whether S3 access or specific permissions that we created, you can select couple of permissions depending on what exactly that group of users should need to do, and then create the group. Once you create the group, then you can attach the users directly to that test group. So I can go to users now, and when you have the test reader user created, I go to that and I can directly add this user to a specific group now. So any permission that is available to that group level will be assigned to this user, and all you have to do is just add user to this groups. So now you can think of, I can create a different set of user groups and have attached certain policies that are required as per the roles of that users which you define under that group. Your user, you don't need to attach the policies independently to the user level. Why AWS gave this idea of like assigning permissions directly to the user level? That is only because to support, some temporary permissions ad hoc use cases. But otherwise, the best practice is you create a user group as per defined rule and add users to that group. There is one more section is role. Now role is a little bit different concept here. Idea is same. You have to create the permissions and policies you can assign under a role. Now the role is something will be assumed by a specific AWS account. So let's say you have a system account or a service account. It is also called as service principal identity or system managed identity. So these are service account basically that your application will be using to connect to a specific database, or it needs to have access to S3, it needs to have access to different databases in AWS. So all that service account related permissions will be assigned based on the role. So usually, if your user is part of if your service account need access to certain AWS resources, that can be assigned to a role, and your service account can actually be part of that role or assume that role. Okay, but high level ideas, this is basically an IAM role and identity you can create that has specific permissions with the credentials that are valid for short durations. Roles can be assumed by entities that you trust. So if you have assigned a role to a specific identity or a system ID, then AWS will let you connect to that resource automatically. It's like your application is running on a VM, and if your VM wants to connect to, AWS DynamoDB database or SQL Server database, and if you have assigned the permission to this role that, hey, this role has access to these different AWS resources based on the policies which we just saw, your VM will automatically be assigned access to that. AWS will let you connect that. So that's all there on the role. Thank you. See you next in the next video.